This morning comes from the 32nd chapter of Genesis. The book of Genesis, after what's usually referred to as the prehistory portion, which includes the creation, the Tower of Babel, the Noah stories, then has three big cycles of stories. There is a cycle associated with Abraham and Sarah. There is a Jacob cycle, and finally there is a Joseph cycle. Isaac, Jacob's father, really doesn't get one of his own. He lives either in Abraham and Sarah's story or in Jacob's story. Our reading for today comes near the end of that Jacob cycle, as Jacob, who has long been absent from his family because of his misdeeds with his brother Esau, finally returns. Listen for what this scripture may say to us, what the Spirit may speak to us through these words. The same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When I was a child, my father would read Bible stories to us just before bedtime. I can still see the big Bible story book that he used. There were stories of Jesus in it, of course, but as a child, the Old Testament stories were more captivating to me. There were lots of hero-type stories. David fighting the giant Goliath with only a sling. Samson, the Hebrew version of Hercules. And then there were all those stories about Abraham and Sarah and their offspring, Jacob, Esau, and Jacob's son, Joseph. As a child, these characters in the Bible stories didn't really seem much like real people. Perhaps that was simply a matter of how distant they were from me historically and culturally. Or perhaps it was because those Bible stories had a kind of comic book quality to them. Whatever the reason, I was well into adulthood before I realized what a messed up, dysfunctional family this clan of Abraham and Sarah was. It gets started with Ishmael and Isaac, the half-brothers, and it only gets worse from there. Rebekah and Isaac had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau is born a few seconds ahead of Jacob. and the sibling rivalry is off and running. Not that the parents do much to help. Dad likes Esau. Mama likes Jacob. Esau is an outdoorsy, hunting and fishing sort of guy, and Dad plans to pass down the family business to him. Jacob is a mama's boy, and he likes hanging out in the tent. He's also sneaky and manipulative, a scoundrel who takes advantage of Esau's tendency to act first and think later. And his mother is happy to assist. Jacob and Esau are born when their father is quite old. And Isaac is feeble and blind by the time the boys are fully grown. Sensing that his time is drawing short, Isaac calls Esau to him and sends him out hunting to bring back some savory game that they can enjoy together. After the meal, Isaac will formally sign over the business to Esau. In the language of the Bible, he will bless Esau. But Mama overhears. She goes to Jacob, and they quite literally cook up a scheme to deceive the old blind father. Mama prepares a savory meal and helps Jacob disguise himself as Esau. He puts on some of Esau's clothes, and Mama uses goat skins to create some arm hair wigs so that the smooth-skinned Jacob now has the hairy arms of his brother. I know it sounds a little crazy, but that's what it says there in the Bible. Jacob goes to his father disguised as Esau. Isaac recognizes Jacob's voice, but the smell of Esau, that savory meal, and those arm hair wigs, and who knows, maybe a little dementia, is enough to fool the old man. And so Isaac blesses Jacob moments before Esau returns to discover that he has been robbed. To be honest, I have no idea why there's no undoing this contract made under false pretenses. But it seems the blessing cannot be taken back. It is Jacob's now. Robbed of his birthright, Esau threatens murder, and Jacob flees for his life, returning to the homeland of his mother and living with her family. By the time he gets up the nerve to come back, Jacob has 2 wives, 11 sons, and a 12th on the way, and 1 daughter. He is still a trickster and a con man who grabs for whatever he wants, and he will repeat the mistakes of his own parents by favoring one of his children over the others, and Joseph will become a spoiled brat whose own brothers plot to kill him. But that's another story. In our story, Jacob is headed home, not knowing whether or not Esau still wants to kill him. Now, I have known my share of dysfunctional families over the years. I've met many, but I don't think I've ever met such a thoroughly messed up group as this one. Now, that might really not make much difference, might not matter at all, except that for some inexplicable reason, God has hitched the hopes of blessing and restoration for all humanity to this dysfunctional family. What was God thinking Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but church congregations can be dysfunctional families themselves. There are manipulative folks who get their way by complaining or threatening to leave. And there are those who rarely lift a finger to do anything or to help, and yet constantly think they deserve more from the church. There are parking lot meetings that circumvent official meetings. There is gossip, and there is anonymous criticism from lots of folks who are angry or upset. And yet, for some inexplicable reason, God has hitched the hopes of blessing and restoration for all humanity to this dysfunctional family. What was God thinking? For much of Jacob's dysfunctional story, God seems largely uninvolved. But as Jacob returns home, that changes. The night before he and Esau meet, a man wrestled with Jacob until daybreak. A man? Esau? God? It is a strange story with religious sensibilities quite different from our own, sensibilities open to a dramatic encounter with a strange and earthy God. This is not about belief. It is about struggle and blessing. Jacob seeks to deal with the man as he does with everyone, grabbing for what he wants. But this time it does not work. Jacob is not defeated, and he does gain a blessing, but in the process, he is changed, he is renamed, and left with a limp. God's plans are still hitched to this dysfunctional family, to Jacob, now Israel, and those who will follow him. But Jacob and those who come after are marked and changed by this blessing, bound in an ongoing struggle with God. I suspect that I have previously mentioned a huge study on the religious beliefs of American youth that was done in the early 2000s. This study looked at a large swath of religious traditions, and it found that the vast majority of young people do not dislike religion or church. They have mostly positive views, but their own beliefs are so bland and benign as to have little impact on their daily lives, producing almost no need to participate in any organized religion. The authors of this study coined the term moralistic, therapeutic Deism for this faith. It has 5 main components: a general belief in God, a God who expects or wants people to be good and moral, a life goal of being happy and feeling good, a God who is not at all involved in day-to-day life, but who may occasionally be available to you in a moment of crisis, and the belief that good people go to heaven. There's nothing offensive about any of this, but neither is there much in the way of substance. Professor and Christian educator Kendra Dean uses terms such as Christianish and cult of nice to describe it. It bears little resemblance to the faith that the church has proclaimed over the centuries. But that is not, according to the study, because these young people have misunderstood or perverted the faith. It is precisely the faith that was transmitted to them by their parents and their congregations. Now, Jacob lived a long way from 21st century America and moralistic therapeutic deism. But I can still see some points of contact, at least before the wrestling match. Aside from moments of crisis, God seems uninvolved in much of Jacob's story. Jacob is all about his own wits and cunning, grabbing for all that he can so that he will be successful and happy. But then, for all practical purposes, God assaults him. It is a strange encounter, and even more strange, Jacob is not defeated in this match, but he is changed. God blesses him, but he is permanently marked, given a new identity and a limp. Now here we are, the dysfunctional descendants of Jacob. Very often, we imagine a distant, benign God, not at all involved in our day-to-day lives, although perhaps willing to give us a little spiritual lift or buzz. We can scarcely imagine a God who assaults us, who grapples with us, and does not overwhelm us, and blesses us, but also transforms us and marks us, sending us out into the world with new identities, with God's blessing and with a limp. Such a thing seems preposterous until we actually meet God. All praise to the God of Abraham and Sarah, the God of Rebekah and Isaac, and the God of Jacob, who calls us to take our part in this unfolding story of God's blessing and restoration for all humanity. Thanks be to God.